Story 1. The room felt suffocating, the air thick with the scent of stale coffee and open textbooks. Emily sat hunched at her desk, her biology notes spread out before her, the dim glow of her desk lamp barely enough to ward off the darkness of the late hour. She had been studying for what felt like days, but the words on the pages were blurring, merging together into an indecipherable mass. Sleep tugged at her relentlessly, but she fought it off, determined to push through. Tomorrow was the final exam. She couldn't afford to fail. Her eyelids grew heavy, and her head dipped, fighting against gravity. She straightened up, eyes fluttering open. Her body ached, every muscle screaming for rest, but the pressure of the exam kept her mind racing. Another hour, she promised herself. Just one more hour of studying. The clock on her desk ticked on, its steady rhythm the only sound in the room. Suddenly, a cold draft brushed across her face. It was so out of place, she froze, unsure if it was real or if her mind was playing tricks on her. She glanced around. Nothing. The window was shut, and the door was firmly locked. Still, the chill lingered, making the hairs on her neck stand on end. It was the first sign. But she dismissed it, too tired to dwell on it. Emily leaned back in her chair, stretching her arms overhead, her eyes closing for just a moment. But when she opened them again, something was wrong. The room was darker, the shadows deeper. She couldn't move. Panic set in as her body refused to respond, no matter how hard she tried to move a finger, a toe, anything. A figure stood at the foot of her bed, just outside the range of the faint moonlight. It was tall, its shape twisted and indistinct. The air seemed to thicken around her, pressing down on her chest. A whisper, barely audible, tickled her ears. "I'm watching," it seemed to say, but the voice wasn't quite human. The figure took a step closer. Emily tried to scream, but no sound left her throat. The presence loomed over her, its cold fingers brushing against her forehead, sending a shock of ice through her body. For a moment, everything stopped, the world, her breath, even her heartbeat. And then, as quickly as it had appeared, it was gone. Emily gasped, her body suddenly able to move again. Her pulse raced. She sat up, eyes wide, staring into the empty room. Her mind spun with confusion. Was it a dream? Or something else entirely? The cold lingered longer this time. Emily woke again, her body frozen in place, her mind fighting the deep grogginess that begged for rest. The darkness in her room was thicker now, like something alive, moving in the corners where the dim light couldn't reach. She could feel it, the weight of unseen eyes on her. The chill seeped through her skin, sinking into her bones. The whispers began again, faint at first, like a distant murmur that grew louder as if the walls themselves were closing in. She tried to move, tried to shake herself awake, but her limbs were heavy, bound by an invisible force. Fear clawed at her throat. She couldn't breathe properly, the air thin, suffocating. Her heartbeat pounded in her chest, echoing in her ears. The figure was there again, standing at the foot of her bed, this time more distinct than before. It was tall, with elongated limbs, a form neither human nor anything she could fully comprehend. This time, the figure was clearer, its face twisted in a grotesque mockery of a human expression, its eyes empty voids. It moved closer, its presence filling the room with a coldness that cut through her, sharp and relentless. The whisper was louder now, a dark, guttural voice that seeped into her very soul. "You can't escape," it hissed. "You belong to me." Emily's chest tightened. She couldn't breathe. Her heart raced as terror flooded her veins. Her thoughts spun in frantic circles. Was this real? Was this a nightmare? She didn't know anymore. The figure reached out, its long, icy fingers brushing her forehead, sending waves of freezing terror through her entire body. She tried to scream, but the sound was locked behind her lips, her voice swallowed by the paralysis. And then, just as she thought she might lose herself to the madness, the figure slowly stepped back. It didn't leave, but it retreated just enough for Emily to feel a sliver of hope. She managed to twitch a finger, a toe. The paralysis was breaking. The figure didn't like it. Its cold laugh reverberated through her skull, sharp and taunting. "I'll be back," it whispered. "You're never safe." With a final, malicious grin, the figure vanished into the shadows. Emily lay there, gasping for breath, her mind racing. This was no longer just a bad dream. She wasn't sure what was real anymore, but she knew one thing: the darkness was real. And it was waiting for her. Emily's breaths came in shallow gasps as she sat upright, her hands gripping the sides of the bed. The shadows that filled her room no longer felt like a passing trick of the light, they felt alive, pulsing with an unnerving energy. She couldn't deny it any longer. It wasn't a dream. The entity, whatever it was real, and it was coming for her. Tonight, she was determined to confront it. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for any sign of the figure. The silence felt oppressive, almost suffocating. The clock on her desk ticked relentlessly, the only sound breaking the heavy stillness. She couldn't afford to look away, couldn't let the fear hold her down again. "I won't be afraid," she whispered to herself. Her voice cracked, but she ignored it. She had no choice. As the minutes stretched into an agonizing eternity, the temperature in the room dropped further. Emily felt the hair on the back of her neck rise. Her muscles tensed, and a wave of cold, malevolent energy washed over her. It was here. She could feel its presence before she saw it. The shadow emerged from the corner, a dark, twisting shape. It moved silently, its eyes glowing faintly in the dark, cold and empty. Emily's heart raced, but she refused to look away. This time, she would face it. The figure hovered at the foot of her bed, its shape distorting with every step it took. Emily's chest tightened as it approached, its form becoming clearer, the twisted features of its face grotesque and mocking. The whispering began again, now louder, more insistent. "You think you can stop me?" it hissed, its voice like 1,000 voices speaking in unison. Emily swallowed hard, her body shaking. She couldn't move, not yet. With every ounce of willpower, she forced herself to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. "What do you want from me? Why are you doing this?" The entity tilted its head, its hollow eyes fixed on her with an eerie intensity. "You belong to me," it crooned. "You always have." As it reached for her, something inside Emily snapped. Her heart thundered, but her voice grew stronger. "No. I won't let you take me." With every ounce of strength, Emily pushed through the paralysis. Her body surged forward, and as she broke free, the figure let out a horrible screech, retreating into the shadows. The room fell silent again. Emily sat there, breathless, her pulse racing. Was it over? Or had she only just begun to understand the darkness that haunted her? Story 2. Sarah sat at her writing desk, the soft hum of her laptop the only sound breaking the silence of the old house. The dim light of her desk lamp cast long shadows against the walls, making the room feel both intimate and isolating. She had hoped that this house, tucked away in the countryside, would offer her the peace and quiet needed to finish her novel. But instead, the more she tried to focus, the more she felt the pull of something unsettling in the air. Her fingers hovered over the keys, words refusing to form as they usually did. The house creaked, a low groan of wood shifting in the night, but it was the air that felt heavy. It wasn't just the stillness. It was the sense that something was watching her, lurking in the periphery. She shook her head, blaming her nerves on the isolation. But the sensation lingered, like an invisible presence, wrapping around her, suffocating her thoughts. A sharp creak echoed from the hallway. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She froze, eyes darting toward the door. Nothing moved. The house was silent again, but the unease hadn't lifted. The feeling of being observed was almost tangible. She glanced over her shoulder, half expecting to see someone standing behind her. But the room was empty. Still, the hair on her neck stood on end. "Get a grip, Sarah," she muttered under her breath. "It's just an old house." She tried to shake the feeling, pushing her anxiety aside and focusing on her screen once more. But then the floorboards groaned again. This time, it wasn't from the hallway, but from just outside the door. A soft shuffle, like someone dragging their feet. She spun in her chair, her pulse quickening, but the hallway was empty. The door remained closed. The house settled back into its eerie silence. "You're imagining things," she thought, trying to convince herself. But the sensation only deepened, a creeping awareness that she wasn't alone. Every corner of the room seemed darker now, as if the shadows themselves were gathering. The light flickered once, then steadied. Sarah exhaled, but it felt like a release from something more than just air. The room felt colder, too, though the radiator was on. She rubbed her arms, a shiver running down her spine. "Just a draft," she whispered to herself. But even she didn't believe it. The following night, the oppressive silence of the house felt thicker, almost suffocating. Sarah had barely managed to sleep the previous evening, the unsettling presence in the air leaving her restless. As she sat down at her desk once again, the familiar chill crept through the room, more pronounced this time. The shadows seemed to cling to the walls, twisting and turning as though they had lives of their own. She ignored it, focusing on her laptop screen, determined to finish a chapter. But her concentration faltered. A soft, almost imperceptible creak echoed through the room, closer this time. She stiffened. "It's nothing," she told herself, but the words didn't settle the unease building in her chest. Another sound, this time the unmistakable shuffle of footsteps, barely audible, but clear enough to make her heart skip a beat. She froze, her breath catching in her throat. The footsteps came closer, and then stopped. Her head snapped toward the door. Nothing. The hallway was empty, the darkness beyond the threshold unbroken. Yet, the air felt charged, as though something was lurking just beyond her vision, waiting for her to acknowledge it. "Get a grip," she muttered under her breath, forcing herself to focus. But her fingers trembled as she typed, her gaze constantly shifting toward the door. "It's nothing," she repeated, her mantra growing weaker by the second. The sensation of being watched intensified. Every inch of her skin prickled with the awareness that she wasn't alone. She glanced toward the hallway again, her eyes narrowing. This time, she saw it. A shadow, deep and impenetrable, moved across the wall just outside her door, too swift to be the product of the lamp's flickering light. She stood up quickly, her heart racing, and moved toward the door. The hallway was empty, again. But the sense of something just out of sight was undeniable. The silence seemed louder now, thick with anticipation. Sarah's breath quickened as she returned to her desk. She didn't dare sit down again, pacing the room instead, feeling the eyes of an unseen observer following her every step. The whisper came next, a low, rasping sound that seemed to vibrate within her very bones. It was faint at first, like a distant hum, but it grew louder, clearer. "I'm here." Sarah's blood ran cold. She whipped around, but again, there was nothing, only shadows stretching further into the darkness. Something was here, and it was no longer hiding. The house felt alive, its walls pressing in, suffocating her as Sarah paced from one room to the next. The whispering had grown more frequent, its tone now unmistakably mocking, as if the very walls were echoing a cruel secret. Each creak of the floorboards seemed to push her toward the brink of madness. It wasn't just the shadows or the cold drafts anymore. The presence in the house was no longer subtle, it was deliberate, following her every move, waiting for her to confront it. That night, Sarah decided she wouldn't run from it any longer. She stood in the middle of the living room, her breath shallow, her hands trembling. The house was still, far too still. The silence before the storm. She had to know. She had to confront it. "I'm not afraid of you," she whispered, her voice shaking. The words felt hollow, even to her, but she said them anyway. There was no turning back now. The air turned cold, unnaturally cold. Her breath came in visible puffs. The shadows deepened around her, closing in on every corner of the room. Her pulse quickened, but she didn't move. She couldn't move. She was frozen, like a rabbit caught in the gaze of a predator. Then the floorboards groaned behind her. Slowly, Sarah turned, but there was nothing in the room. The whisper came again, low and guttural, as if the house itself were speaking to her. "You think you're free, don't you?" The voice crawled under her skin, sending a chill through her bones. Something shifted in the shadows near the staircase. Her heart leaped in her chest. She took a step forward, her body betraying her every instinct, urging her to run. But she couldn't. "I am free," she said louder this time, forcing the words out, despite the fear twisting her insides. "You don't control me." The shadows stretched unnaturally toward her, twisting and curling, but they stopped just short of reaching her. A low, cold laugh filled the room, its echo rattling the walls. And then, in a flash of movement, the figure appeared. It was tall, its outline barely human, its eyes hollow, infinite black voids staring directly into hers. "You're not free," it whispered. "You never were." The house seemed to shrink around her, the walls pressing in tighter. But Sarah, shaking with terror, refused to look away. She faced the entity head-on, her voice trembling, but resolute. "Then leave. I won't let you haunt me anymore." For a moment, the figure simply watched her, its cold gaze never leaving her eyes. The air crackled with tension. Then, as if losing interest, it vanished, leaving only the silence. But Sarah wasn't fooled. The house was still watching. Story 3. Lily stood in the doorway, taking in the house for the first time. It looked so inviting, nestled among the trees on the quiet street, its brick facade bathed in the soft light of the setting sun. There was something oddly charming about it, an old-world elegance that seemed at odds with the modern city she had just left behind. The air smelled of earth and wood, familiar yet unfamiliar. "Well, here we are," she muttered to Adam, her boyfriend of 2 years, who was standing beside her, his hand casually resting on her shoulder. "Perfect. Just what you wanted," Adam replied, his voice warm with approval. But Lily didn't feel the same certainty. She stepped inside, her shoes clicking against the hardwood floors. The interior was just as charming as the exterior, dark wood paneling, a large stone fireplace in the living room, and wide windows letting in the last rays of light. But the house felt cold, despite its warmth. There was an emptiness to it, like it had been waiting for someone to fill it. "Feels familiar," Lily said softly, as she set down her bags and walked toward the living room. It wasn't just the house that seemed familiar, it was the air, the stillness that hung in the corners, the faint sense of déjà vu that crept over her skin. It was as if the house had seen her before, as though it had been waiting for her all along. Adam didn't seem to notice. He tossed his coat over the arm of a chair and plopped down on the couch, already at ease. "What do you think? Perfect for starting over, right?" Lily smiled weakly, but the feeling of being watched hadn't left her. She turned toward the hallway, half expecting someone to appear at the other end, but no one was there. Only shadows, deep and silent, stretching into the dark. The creak of floorboards echoed behind her, startling her. She spun around, but again, there was nothing. The house was silent once more. "You okay?" Adam asked, his voice slightly concerned. Lily nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah. Just getting used to it." But as she stepped further into the house, the unsettling sense that something was hidden in its corners lingered, growing stronger with every step she took. Something was watching her. And she didn't know if it was the house or something within it. The days passed, and Lily tried to settle into the rhythm of her new life in the house. But no matter how much she wanted to ignore it, the feeling of being watched never faded. It was subtle at first, a flicker in her peripheral vision, a shiver down her spine when the house creaked late at night. She would brush it off, telling herself it was just the old bones of the house settling. Yet, the unease gnawed at her, growing with every passing hour. One evening, after unpacking the last of the boxes, Lily found herself alone in the living room. Adam was out with friends, and the house felt colder than usual. She sat down on the couch, the quiet pressing in on her like a weight. The air was thick with a silence that felt unnatural. It wasn't the absence of sound, but the presence of something else, something that made the silence feel suffocating. The old grandfather clock in the corner ticked rhythmically, its sound steady and almost reassuring. But the more she listened, the more it seemed like the ticking was getting louder, each second dragging her deeper into an eerie awareness. She glanced toward the hallway. The light from the living room barely touched the edge of the dark corridor, but she swore she saw something move, just a shadow, barely a flicker. Her heart skipped a beat. She blinked, and the shadow was gone. Lily stood up quickly, her legs stiff with a sudden tension. She walked toward the hallway, her footsteps echoing unnervingly in the silence. The air grew colder the closer she got to the door at the end of the hall. She reached out, hand hovering just before the doorknob. But the house, as if on cue, creaked loudly, making her jump. "Stop it," she whispered to herself, shaking her head. "It's just an old house. Stop letting your mind get to you." But as she stepped back into the living room, she heard it, a faint whisper, too quiet to make out, but unmistakable. It seemed to come from the very walls around her. "I'm here." Her pulse quickened. She turned, ready to run, but saw only shadows. The house was watching her again. And this time, it wasn't hiding. The whispers came again that night, louder this time, vibrating in the walls like a distant hum. Lily couldn't escape them. She paced the living room, her pulse racing, the air in the house thick with tension. Her breath came in shallow gasps, the weight of the silence pressing down on her, suffocating her every move. She was sure, absolutely certain, that she was not alone. The house seemed to breathe with her, its old bones creaking in rhythm with her heartbeat. The walls felt closer somehow, like they were narrowing in around her, closing off any hope of escape. She reached for the light switch, but the bulb flickered, casting her reflection in the mirror at the end of the hall. For a moment, her reflection seemed to move independently, tilting its head just slightly, as though it knew something she didn't. Lily froze. "No, this isn't real," she thought, blinking rapidly to clear her vision. But the reflection didn't change. The cold draft that had been following her, creeping across the room, intensified. It was as though the house was breathing with her, exhaling icy air, urging her to remember. Then it hit her. The photograph. The one she'd found in the attic. The faces had looked so familiar, too familiar. She wasn't imagining this. The house knew her. It had known her all along. Her breath caught in her throat. The woman in the photograph had looked at her with an expression that seemed to say, "You've always belonged here." A sudden noise from the hallway broke her trance. It wasn't a creak or a whisper, it was a door, slowly creaking open on its own. The hallway, now darker than before, seemed to beckon her. "Don't go," her mind screamed, but her legs moved before she could stop them. With each step, the air grew colder. The door at the end of the hall, once closed, now stood ajar, the light from the living room spilling weakly into the darkness. She stepped closer, her breath shallow. The whispering intensified, filling her head, drowning out all other sounds. "You're here," it hissed, so close to her ear that she spun around, heart pounding. But no one was there. Only the darkness. Lily stepped forward, her hand trembling as it reached for the door. She had to know. Had to face whatever this house was holding. As the door opened fully, the house seemed to breathe in one final, heavy sigh. The memories awoke, and Lily understood. This house remembered, and it wasn't ready to let her go.